Hello and greetings from the campus of Northern State University in Aberdeen, South Dakota. My name is Dr. Marla Fogderud, and on behalf of the Sons of Norway, I am delighted to welcome you to this pre-concert virtual lecture where I have the distinct privilege of introducing you to a little more information about Norway's current rising star in the music world, Lise Davidsen. I must say that the singer's world is a small one, and generally we tend to know a lot of people all around the world. And in this case, being that Norway is also a small country, I was delighted to find out how many connections Ms. Davidsen and I actually have. She attended the Grieg Academy in Bergen, where I have had the pleasure to present some information at conferences in the past. And I attended Norges Musikkhøgskolen in Oslo. So we have many people in common. And I have been so overjoyed to see her really meteoric rise in the opera world over the last few years. She is called a lyric dramatic soprano, which means that she hasn't the heaviest voice of all the classifications, but yet one that is singing what are considered the lyric Wagner roles and a lot of Strauss and similar types of music. She has really attracted attention since she stepped in and sang the role of Sieglinde a few years ago, and that started her on this path to the wonderful career that she is enjoying right now. 2015 was a very special year for Ms. Davidsen, and that was the year that she won the Queen Sonja competition in Norway. And in addition to winning first prize, she also received the Ingrid Bjoner Award for the best interpretation by a Norwegian competitor. And that in itself is very special to me, since Ingrid was my teacher as well when I studied in Norway. She achieved her bachelor's degree in classical singing in 2010 from the Grieg Academy, as I said, and originally joined the Norwegian Soloists Kor, or the Soloists Choir, as a mezzo-soprano, which is very common with this voice type. So when she began her serious opera studies in Copenhagen, then she was encouraged to sing the soprano repertoire that she is performing right now. She's gone on to debut with companies all around the world. And as I said, 2015 was that very special year. She was also a triple winner that year of the Hans Gabor Belvedere singing competition, the HSBC Aix-en-Provence Laureate, and the Statoil Talent Bursary. So she is definitely on her way, skyrocketing in the world of opera. I'm going to read a little quote from her biography for you here that says, last season, now this is a couple years ago, Lisa took her first major Wagner role, Elisabeth in Tannhäuser, which she performed at Opernhaus Zürich, Bayerische Staatsoper, and in a triumphant debut at Bayreuth Festival, which is, of course, Wagner's own theater, where she was hailed by the international press as, quote, a voice once in a century. Now, I find this very interesting because this year, in fact, on July 12th to be specific, we celebrated the 125th Jubilee of Norwegian Wagnerian soprano Kirsten Flagstad. And in fact, she is known by the moniker the voice of a century, that of course meaning the 20th century. So perhaps we have a Norwegian on her way to being the voice of the 21st century as well, which I think is very special for a country as small as Norway. There was, for a time, a kind of constant stream of Wagnerian sopranos coming out of the Scandinavian countries. And after a little bit of a dry spell in recent years, I found many people were asking, what's happened? Why aren't those big voices coming out of Scandinavia anymore? Well, now we are back on track with Ms. Davidsen, who is joining, of course, voices such as Ingrid Bjoner, Birgit Nilsson, and Kirsten Flagstad. So we're pleased that Norway is able to offer up another stellar voice in this repertoire. I want to speak a little bit as well about the venue where Ms. Davidsen will be speaking today. It's a rather special place, and perhaps those of you who have traveled to Norway might have made a stop to look at this building. Right now, today, it is open to the public as a museum following a 4-year-long renovation. So this building is Oscarshallen, which was the summer palace built by King Oscar I and his wife, Queen Josephine. It was under construction from 1847 to 1852, which also corresponds to a time in Norwegian history where there was a huge blossoming of interest in the culture that made Norway really unique, what we now call the Golden Age. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I discuss the song literature here momentarily. So the architect was actually Danish. His name is Johan Henrik Nebelong. But King Oscar and Queen Josephine were very involved in the project themselves, and in fact sought to promote Norwegian art and craftsmanship by commissioning the building of the Summer Palace. And today it really is a monument to Norwegian artisans from that time period, the mid-1800s. It sits on what is now called Bygdøy Peninsula, along with many other museums. That is a wonderful spot for tourists to get a taste of many aspects of Norwegian life and culture. And it's in a very dramatic location on a steep slope overlooking the sea. It would have been a wonderful spot to spend the summer. The king and queen provided private funds for the construction of this palace, as they themselves were owners of the land. At the time, the royal family owned much of that peninsula, which was called Ladegårdsøen. And so it's actually 173 years plus 1 day ago, August 30th, 1847, that the blueprints for this palace are dated. As I said, Norwegian artists were commissioned particularly to deal with the interior of this summer palace. The king and the queen used Oscarshallen to provide patronage to local artisans and assign a number of artists to the project, some of who you may recognize. The most important three that I found listed were Joachim Frisch, Adolf Tiedemann, and Hans Gude. Now, Tiedemann and Gude you may know from their depictions of country life in Norway, particularly Hardanger. I found an interesting tidbit, and that was a claim that while one of the artisans christened this palace Oscarshallen, it should probably have been called Josephinshallen because it was her idea to build it in the first place. But however, it is now known as Oscarshallen after her husband, King Oscar. As I said, it underwent a long renovation, bringing it back to its former glory. And I would like to read to you a quote from the royal website concerning some of the buildings. It says, "The exterior and interior of the main building, with the finely tuned interplay between architecture, furniture, sculpture, and painting in the building's key rooms, make Oscarshall a Gesamtkunstwerk, a work of art that combines a range of different art forms that are all equal parts of the whole." Now, once again, it's very interesting to me that Gesamtkunstwerk is a term that's associated with Richard Wagner. That was his idea of how opera productions should be put together, that the staging, the music, the theater itself should all be one giant conglomeration of ideas from the same person. So, Gesamtkunstwerk is the word of the day. Now, after the palace was finally completed, and it did undergo some difficulties along the way due to some less than stellar workmanship by various folks, and also dealing with the dampness because it was right by the sea, or is right by the sea. But it was finally finished in 1852. So this renovation took place from 2005 to 2009, and I was amazed to read how detailed this was. In fact, when it came to removing some of the old layers of paint, it was done in some areas using a scalpel, small, fine details. And so it has regained its original color, which was white. Some of you may have seen it as a pink palace. It was painted pale pink after World War II. I'm not sure the reasoning behind that, but now it has been returned to its original white. One of the main things that the renovation was meant to accomplish was to make it more accessible. And of course, since I said it was now open to the public, they would like everyone to be able to access this site. And it is now mainly a tourist attraction and also a concert venue, as we'll see today. This actually continues the tradition of Oscar I himself and his queen Josephine, because they opened the palace to the public in their time and really meant to have it be sort of a tourist attraction. If you Google Oscarshallen, you will be able to find some pictures of its gorgeous interior, rich colors, beautiful workmanship. It really is quite a sight. And I encourage you, if you take a trip to Oslo, to put that on your list of places to visit in the future. Now, to speak about the actual music that Miss Davidsen will be singing today, I've been asked to discuss the songs of Edvard Grieg. I am actually a specialist in Norwegian song myself and have sung all of these pieces that she will be singing today. So I feel like I can speak to them on a very personal level and share with you a little bit of background on some of them. I have a feeling that they will be familiar to those of you who are devotees of classical music already, but just in case, I will give you a little further information and hopefully give you some tidbits that you didn't know before. So first I'd like to talk about the two songs by Grieg from Opus 33, which are the Vinje songs. And I thought that it would be important for me to share a little bit about Osmund Vinje, since he is not as well known as Henrik Ibsen, and we'll discuss him later. So first of all, I'll show you a picture of Vinje in case you haven't seen him. Most of us, I think, have seen images of the rather portly figure of Henrik Ibsen with his mutton chops beard and little glasses. But maybe you haven't seen Osmund Vinje. He's a rather serious looking fellow. Although I know through his writings that he did have good humor as well. So he lived from 1818 to 1870 and is regarded as one of the most important poet and prose writers of the 19th century in Norway, particularly for his work in establishing nynorsk as a language that was a worthy and artistic art form in Norway. Some of you may know that there are two forms of the Norwegian language, bokmål, which is the Danish Norwegian version, and then nynorsk, which is a compilation of dialects that was put together by Norwegian linguist Ivar Aasen. And it was just coming into more usage at the time when Vinje was writing his poems and other works. He came from very humble background. He was born to parents who worked on a small rented farm, and he took his last name from the township Vinje, as well as his family name Olafsen. So he is Osmund Olafsen Vinje, often seen written as just A.O. Vinje. His experiences in this rural setting really had a great influence on his writing and his subject matter, and it was very rare at this time that a writer should come from such a rural background. After working for a time as a teacher, he attended the private academy Heltberg's Studentfabrik, along with none other than Henrik Ibsen and Bjørnstjerne Bjørnson. So really 3 stars in the constellation of Norwegian literature right there. And he eventually became a licensed lawyer. However, writing was his first love, and he was drawing enough attention in that capacity that he was able to start his own weekly magazine called Dølen in 1858. In Vinje's time, as I said, there was a huge blossoming of pride and interest in what really made Norway unique, and this desire to cast off the shadow of Denmark. had led to an enormous increase in the output of painters and writers, musicians in the mid-19th century. And that is now known as Norway's golden age of culture and literature. So as I said, Ivar Aasen's newly developed language, known as landsmål at the time, now we call it nynorsk, was gaining some usage. And when Åsmund Vinje encountered this national pride of the time, he decided he could no longer write in bokmål. So he turned instead to nynorsk and was the first major author to utilize the language in his prose and poetry. Having some of his poems set by composer Edvard Grieg firmly established Vinje's nynorsk writing as a worthy example of Norwegian culture. Eventually, Vinje's use of nynorsk in many serious works had a great effect on the decision by Stortinget, the Norwegian Parliament, in 1885 that declared bokmål and nynorsk were on equal footing. Now, there is still a lot of discussion today about which one is quote-unquote better. As a singer, I can say that I enjoy singing texts written in either one, probably equally. Sadly, Vinje's life was cut short when he was diagnosed with stomach cancer, and he wished so badly to return to the mountains of his youth that he actually signed himself out of the hospital in Oslo and began journeying back to Vinje. However, he wasn't able to complete that journey, and he passed away at the home of his friend Anton Christian Bang, who was a pastor at Gran, north of Oslo. And this was sadly at the age of only 52. In 1985, Vinje received the great honor of having his image placed on the Norwegian 50 kroner bill, or 50-lapp, as they would call it. And it's similar, for those who are familiar or not, to an American $10 bill, roughly. And I have a picture of that as well. It's green. As I said, Vinje's poetry received a great boost in popularity when Edvard Grieg used 15 of them in his song settings. 12 are published in Opus 33, and the others were published posthumously. These poems were also responsible for Grieg returning to composition after 2 years of a sort of dry spell, during which he himself feared that he had lost his inspiration and wasn't going to be able to compose anymore. But in Vinje's poems, he found a real kindred spirit, and that reignited his creative fire. So Vinje's poems are characterized by these following things: a strong rhyme scheme, alliteration or near alliteration, interplay between the vowels in words such as måle and male, blomar and bløma, so on and so forth, and then a strong depiction of nature. And sometimes nature receives human characteristics in his poetry, such as being a comforter. And we have to remember, thinking back to how badly he wanted to return to his mountain homes, he saw that as being a comfort. I will point out as a singer that these characteristics, particularly the alliteration, make this language very difficult to translate, especially into a singable form of it. So my advice is that everyone should just learn to sing in Norwegian. So Opus 33, number 2, is the beautiful and often performed Våren. It's often translated into English as the last spring. However, the Norwegian is clearly just spring, the spring. Whether or not it will be the speaker's last spring is unknown, and that's the point of the whole poem. The text is a marvelous example of Vinje's attentively descriptive style, giving rather minute details about the melting snow, the emerging grass, and the speaker's emotions as he views all of this. Grieg achieves a sweep and a pull to the line that is so powerful it makes the heart just overflow with emotion, just as the speaker in the poem does. It will be interesting to see today which of the verses Miss Davidsen actually sings. There are 3. Oftentimes the second one is omitted. However, I find that one to be very meaningful myself, so I hope she sings all 3. Then number 9, Verondana, gives us a real picture of the landscape that was so dear to Vinja. And I think most of us could think of a time when a memory long forgotten is recalled so sharply that it makes us catch our breath and then really stop to ponder its deeper meaning. And the line in this poem that does that for me is "Det strömmer på mig så jag knappt kan anda." It streams over me so that I can hardly breathe. It's such a powerful moment. And that's precisely what Vinja produces in this poem. And Grieg's setting, with its constant, gently pulsing piano accompaniment, only enhances this idea. And this was one of Grieg's favorite compositional techniques. And so even though the harmony is constantly shifting, the piano never gets in the way of the singer. And that is something Edvard Grieg felt was absolutely crucial for solo songs. Now to back up to the Ibsen setting that is on today's program. Ibsen lived from 1828 to 1906, so quite a bit longer life than Vinja. And of course, he is known today as Norway's literary giant. Ibsen, in his own lifetime, was a cause for both adulation and consternation amongst Norwegians. He, in fact, exiled himself to Italy in 1862 and then spent a time in Germany before returning to Norway. And his works, such as A Doll's House and Ghosts, stirred up controversy all over Europe. However, he was able to return to Norway in 1891 as a literary hero, and he actually became somewhat of a tourist attraction himself, holding his daily court at Oslo's Grand Café. And many of you who have visited Oslo have perhaps either walked by or perhaps made a stop at Grand Hotel and the cafe, which is still there today. One of Ibsen's self-professed influences was William Shakespeare. And it's interesting to note that today, Shakespeare's plays are the most often performed in the world of theater, and Ibsen's are number 2. So in addition to his many plays, which are familiar to the world audience today, he also wrote about 300 poems, some 65 of which were published in a collection in 1871 called simply Dikte, or Poems. And among them is En Svane, which is the text for Opus 25, number 2, which you'll hear today. And this has become one of Grieg's most beloved and often performed songs. It describes the loss of a beautiful person who, like a swan, was silent until death. Now, Ibsen, in true romantic era fashion, seemed to constantly be falling in love, even when the circumstances were utterly impossible. So I can't say for sure that there is a specific woman behind this text. However, another poem in this Opus 25, Borte, was inspired by a particular woman, Thea Brun, whom Ibsen met shortly before she succumbed to tuberculosis. And it is apparent in that text that he was truly captivated by her. The swan represents the soul in Nordic folklore and poetry, and this tender and poignant rendering of the swan's final song cannot fail to touch the heart. While Grieg indicates in his markings that the song is to be performed, quote, held back and restrained in typical Norwegian understated fashion, he also uses a huge range of dynamics from double P, which is very soft, to double F, very loud. So it is, for a short 2-page work, extremely dramatic in the presentation of this beautiful text. I am very interested to see what Ms. Davidsen does with this song, which is so near and dear to my heart, having performed it many times myself. Regardless, I know you will enjoy her interpretations. I thank you for joining me for this little pre-concert talk, and I wish you, as they say in Norway, god fornøyelse, or good enjoyment. Thank you.